The sentence was delivered without hesitation, but its effect moved through the royal family like a shockwave. Lady Louise Windsor, usually measured and fiercely private, declared that Queen Camilla would no longer be welcome at the family's closed gatherings. In one instant, a quiet young royal stepped into a conflict older and deeper than anyone expected, and forced the palace to confront a division it had spent years trying to conceal. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Louise stood firm at Bagshot Park as silence deepened. In a recorded private conversation described by aides, she repeated, "Camilla is not welcome at our private family gatherings." She said the boundary covered Windsor suppers, memorial evenings, and intimate celebrations hosted by Edward and Sophie's family. These were not official royal engagements, meaning duties performed for the crown, but personal occasions where relatives expected trust and safety. Sophie froze as her daughter finished. The Duchess of Edinburgh, the title held by Prince Edward's wife, understood why it mattered. Louise had built her reputation on restraint, making her words impossible to dismiss as rebellion. She was risking family peace. Sophie felt pride, yet fear followed, because her daughter had crossed the line between private frustration and open defiance. Camilla received the message at Clarence House through a documented account. She removed her glasses, placed them beside tea, and asked whether Charles had heard. The Queen Consort understood the danger. Louise was not acting alone. Several relatives had concluded that Camilla's presence made gatherings tense, guarded, and unsafe. That mattered, because these meetings were among the last places where the family could speak, without palace strategy controlling every word. The exclusion was already active. Edward approved a revised table plan for an upcoming supper, and Camilla's place had been removed before Louise spoke. This was not a threat. It was confirmation. The young royal's hands trembled, but she clasped them together and refused to withdraw. When Sophie asked whether she wished to soften it, Louise answered that silence had protected the wrong people for too long. That answer changed everything. Charles faced a choice between defending his wife and asking what pain had pushed his niece this far. Sophie knew the next conversation could fracture loyalties surviving years of strain. Camilla knew it too. One question overshadowed everything. What happened behind closed doors to make the family's quietest voice become its most severe? To understand why Louise finally broke the silence, the palace first had to confront the complicated loyalties of everyone standing on the other side of that closed door. To understand why Louise's words carried such force, one must understand the people standing behind them. This was not simply a disagreement between a young royal and a queen. It was a clash between loyalty, grief, family memory, and the uneasy rules of belonging inside the House of Windsor. Every person involved had something to lose, and Louise's statement threatened to expose exactly where each of them truly stood. Louise had grown up in an unusual position. As the daughter of Prince Edward and Sophie, she lived close enough to royal duty to understand its pressures, yet far enough from the direct succession, the line determining who inherits the throne, to experience moments when family could still feel like family. She knew the rules, the silences, and the price of breaking either. But she also knew that her parents had spent years protecting a quieter space where younger relatives could speak, without every word becoming palace strategy. Sophie had helped create that refuge, and Louise had watched what it cost her. Her mother supported the monarchy through grief, scandal, and uncertainty, often absorbing dismissive remarks and subtle changes in status without complaint. Edward saw the same sacrifices, but he understood why his wife remained silent. Palace unity usually demanded that dependable people surrender the most. Louise had finally decided that Sophie had surrendered enough. Camilla heard something far more painful in the exclusion. She did not see one missed supper. She saw proof that her title had never guaranteed personal acceptance. The Queen Consort feared that some Windsors still regarded her as an outsider, tolerated in public but resisted in private. That insecurity deepened when William learned of Louise's decision and refused to condemn her. His carefully neutral response unsettled Charles, because it suggested the prince understood the hidden reasons better than the king had been told. Anne made the danger even clearer. In a private conversation, later documented by a family aide, the Princess Royal told Edward that Louise should never have been forced to say aloud what older relatives had discussed for months. Edward did not challenge her. He knew Anne was right, and that knowledge made his next conversation with his daughter even harder. Edward found Louise alone after the declaration. He did not demand an apology or ask her to protect the palace. He asked whether she was prepared for the consequences. Louise admitted she was frightened, but said she feared returning to false harmony even more. Her father heard no rebellion in her answer. He heard exhaustion. That exhaustion had begun during a memorial evening meant to honor the late queen. One remark had changed the mood, reopened old loyalties, and turned private discomfort into a fracture no title could repair. And when the family looked back for the moment, everything changed. Every memory returned to the same dinner, the same sentence, and the same unbearable silence. The rupture did not begin with a public speech or a formal decree. It began weeks earlier, during a private memorial dinner at Bagshot Park, where one carefully chosen remark turned an already tense evening into the point of no return. Those present would later remember the silence that followed, the chair pushed back from the table, and the moment Lady Louise realized that restraint was no longer protecting the people she loved. Edward and Sophie had planned the evening as something deeply personal. Only close relatives were invited, with no aides, photographers, or ceremonial speeches. The gathering marked the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth II's death, and Sophie had built it around memories rather than protocol. Louise placed a handwritten family card beside an empty chair, a quiet symbol of remembrance for the grandmother whose presence had once held their fragile loyalties together. Camilla arrived late, already aware that the evening carried emotional weight. Yet instead of joining that grief, the Queen Consort warned that the family needed to stop building private ceremonies around the past. She argued that such gatherings weakened Charles's authority and encouraged rival circles within the monarchy. The words landed heavily because they transformed mourning into suspicion. Sophie tried to explain that the chair was not political, but Camilla instructed a staff member to remove it before dinner began. Louise watched her mother absorb the humiliation without raising her voice. Sophie said softly that the symbol honored someone they loved. Camilla answered that symbols became political when people chose to make them so. That was the moment restraint broke. As the staff member reached for the chair, Louise stood, pulled it back into position, and told the Queen that her grandmother's memory would not be treated like an inconvenience. Silence took control of the room. Anne did not intervene, but she quietly ensured the chair remained untouched. Edward saw his daughter's anger, yet he also saw the pain beneath it. Louise had not acted for attention. She had acted because Sophie had once again been expected to surrender something meaningful in the name of unity. Camilla confronted Louise privately afterward and warned that youthful emotion should not be confused with authority. The young royal answered that authority without sensitivity was exactly why the family no longer felt safe speaking honestly. Her words reached beyond one dinner. They exposed a pattern. William later called Edward and said the evening confirmed that the problem was no longer a single remark, but control entering spaces meant to remain personal. Camilla soon demanded a retraction of Louise's later exclusion statement. Louise agreed to meet her face to face, but she made one condition clear. She would attend the meeting to explain herself, not to apologize. The dinner had exposed the wound, but the private meeting that followed would determine whether it could still be hidden or whether the family would finally tear away the covering completely. The confrontation came behind closed doors, away from cameras, aides, and ceremonial smiles. Louise entered a private sitting room, knowing Camilla had already heard every word. What followed was not loud at first. It was controlled, personal, and far more dangerous than shouting. Two women faced each other across a room filled with royal history, while one question hung between them. Who had the right to decide who belonged inside the family? Camilla had requested the Windsor meeting expecting an explanation, followed by a quiet withdrawal before Charles felt compelled to intervene. She entered as queen, carrying the authority of the crown and the expectation of deference that came with it. Louise arrived alone. She had no staff, prepared statement, or palace advisor. She carried only one belief: a private gathering hosted by her immediate family did not belong to the monarchy as an institution. Camilla spoke first. She told Louise that excluding the king's wife was an insult to Charles and could divide the monarchy into competing households. The queen argued that personal choices carried public consequences when royal relatives were involved. Louise listened without interrupting, but she refused the guilt being placed before her. Rank, she answered, could command formal respect. It could not command affection, trust, or entry into every private room. Louise then said what others had avoided. Camilla had repeatedly turned intimate moments into tests of loyalty. Relatives felt watched in their own homes, uncertain whether private words would remain private. The accusation struck hard because it reached beyond the memorial dinner. It questioned whether the queen consort had used her position to control spaces where titles were supposed to fall away. Camilla rose and told Louise she did not possess the authority to ban a queen. The young royal remained standing, met her gaze, and answered, "I am not banning the queen. I am deciding who enters my family's private room." The silence that followed was colder than anger. Camilla accused Sophie of encouraging the revolt, but Louise rejected the claim immediately. Her mother had urged caution and warned her about the consequences. Louise alone had chosen to speak, and she alone would carry the blame. Louise then revealed that the memorial evening had only been the final trigger. During earlier gatherings, private conversations had been repeated to palace officials, while family disagreements later appeared in Charles's briefings, official summaries prepared to inform the king. Trust had not collapsed in one night. It had been slowly taken apart. Camilla ended the meeting by saying Charles would decide what happened next. Louise understood the warning, but she also understood its limit. The king could govern the royal household. Whether he could govern affection inside another family's home was far less certain. The confrontation had ended without an apology, leaving the family to answer a far more dangerous question: whose authority actually governed the private life of the Windsors? Louise's statement sounded personal, but the decision behind it depended on something larger: who controlled the family's private spaces? The monarchy has formal power, but its most intimate gatherings operate through custom, invitations, and quiet agreements. In that hidden territory, Sophie, Edward, Anne, and William each held influence. Camilla may have worn the crown beside Charles, yet Louise had challenged whether that crown carried authority into every private room. Charles could control official royal occasions, meaning events arranged under the monarch's authority for public or ceremonial purposes. But Bagshot Park belonged to a different world. Private suppers there were hosted by Edward and Sophie, created so relatives could speak honestly, preserve memories, and remain connected without every disagreement becoming palace business. The distinction mattered because once the crown entered those rooms, trust disappeared with it. Edward felt trapped between his daughter and his brother. He wanted to protect Louise, yet he feared that silence would be interpreted by Charles as betrayal. Alone in his study, he drafted a message, deleted it, and began again. Each version sounded either too defensive or too weak. Finally, he put down the phone, knowing that no careful sentence could remove the conflict now facing his family. Sophie refused to let fear decide for them. She told Edward that forcing Louise to apologize would teach their daughter a devastating lesson: that rank mattered more than emotional safety. The Duchess remained deeply saddened by the division, but she would not sacrifice Louise simply to make the palace appear united. Edward heard the firmness in her voice and understood that Sophie had reached her own limit. Anne moved before Charles could issue a demand. During a private conversation recorded in a family account, the Princess Royal warned him that forcing Camilla into those gatherings would create the public rebellion he was desperate to avoid. The king listened, but the real pressure came when William delivered his position. The prince said he would attend the next gathering only if the host's wishes were respected. That changed the balance completely. Charles could no longer dismiss the exclusion as the anger of one inexperienced young woman. Edward, Anne, Sophie, and William were not speaking with one voice, but they were protecting the same boundary. Charles read their messages at his desk and removed his glasses. Defending Camilla might now cause several relatives to withdraw together. Before he could decide, the next invitation list was circulated. Her name was absent. The blank space made denial impossible. What had begun as a painful sentence was about to become a visible reality, and the first empty chair would carry more force than any palace announcement. The first consequences were immediate and unmistakable. Invitations were rewritten. A planned family supper was moved. Camilla's name disappeared from a private guest list without explanation. Behind palace walls, the meaning was understood at once. Louise's words had become action. For Camilla, the exclusion was no longer an emotional insult, but a physical reality. A closed door, an empty place at the table, and a family choosing distance over another uneasy performance. Edward and Sophie proceeded with the supper at Bagshot Park, refusing to let the conflict destroy the private refuge they had protected for years. Charles received a personal invitation, but it did not include his wife. The distinction was deliberate. This was not an official royal occasion controlled by the sovereign. It was a family gathering, hosted inside their home, where the hosts decided who could enter. Charles declined. He would not attend without Camilla, and his refusal immediately widened the damage. Louise had challenged one person's presence, but now her decision was separating an uncle from his brother, a father from his younger son, and the monarch from relatives who had once stood beside him during the crown's most difficult moments. Camilla learned that the evening would continue without either of them. She asked her aide to leave, closed the door, and sat alone beside a tray prepared for two. The queen consort felt humiliated, but beneath that humiliation was fear. The family was proving that life could continue without her. Worse, Charles's absence had not stopped them. Louise felt no victory when she saw the two unused places. Her boundary had been respected, yet the cost rested before her. Sophie began to explain why the chairs were empty, but Anne placed her napkin down and ended the pretense. She said no one at the table needed an explanation. They all understood. Pressure soon arrived from the palace. Charles's office sent an administrative request and instruction issued by his staff, rather than a formal royal command, asking Edward to postpone future gatherings until the dispute was resolved. He refused. Private family life, he answered, could not be suspended simply because the king's household disliked the guest list. Camilla then made her countermove. She proposed hosting her own family weekend and expected senior relatives to attend with their spouses. The invitation would force everyone to choose publicly between her authority and the boundary Louise had drawn. Before that rival gathering could take place, Charles summoned his niece alone. Louise expected anger, perhaps even punishment. Instead, she found a man struggling to understand how defending his wife had left him standing outside his own family. The empty chairs had hardened the division. But behind one final closed door, Louise would explain the truth that neither Charles nor Camilla had been willing to hear. The turning point came when Louise met King Charles alone. There were no advisors, no family secretaries, and no prepared statements between them. She was not confronting the monarch in public. She was speaking to an uncle whose choices had shaped the family she grew up inside. In that quiet exchange, anger gave way to something more painful. Louise explained that the ban was not revenge, but a boundary drawn to protect trust that had already been broken. Charles dismissed his staff before asking Louise to speak freely. He did not want the polished language used for official briefings, meaning formal summaries prepared for the sovereign. He wanted the truth from his niece. Louise told him Camilla remained queen at ceremonies, public duties, and every occasion governed by the crown. But private gatherings were different. Rank could secure a place beside the king. It could not guarantee entry into rooms where trust was the only invitation that mattered. Charles felt the distinction as rejection. Excluding his wife, he said, felt like excluding part of him. Louise did not dismiss his pain. She understood that loyalty to Camilla had become inseparable from his own sense of dignity. Yet she warned that forcing her inclusion would not restore unity. It would simply cause Sophie, Anne, William, and perhaps others, to stay away instead. Louise's voice broke when she admitted how frightened she had been. Speaking aloud had not made her feel powerful. It had made her feel exposed. She said older relatives had softened the truth for so long that Camilla had come to believe no boundary existed. Every careful silence had protected peace for one evening, while making the next confrontation more certain. Charles turned away and remained silent. Louise placed the memorial card from Bagshot on the table between them. The empty chair, she explained, had never been intended as a challenge to his reign. It had been an act of remembrance for the late queen, and treating that memory as a political threat had wounded everyone present. Charles finally asked the question that mattered most: could Camilla ever return? Louise answered yes, but only if the queen acknowledged the hurt she had caused and accepted that private memories did not weaken the crown. The king understood the choice before him. He told Louise he would not compel Edward and Sophie to issue an invitation. He also cancelled Camilla's proposed rival weekend, recognizing that forced attendance would deepen the fracture rather than heal it. The palace began preparing a carefully worded response, but control had arrived too late. Louise's sentence had already escaped into public view. Charles had chosen restraint inside Windsor, yet beyond its gates, one brutal headline was about to turn a private boundary into a national verdict. By morning, the private family rupture had become a national spectacle. One newspaper printed a stark front page showing Camilla outside a closed palace door beneath the headline, "Not Welcome." At Windsor Castle, a small crowd gathered near the Long Walk, some defending the Queen, others praising Louise's courage. The image was simple, brutal, and impossible to ignore. The monarchy's most guarded family argument had become a public referendum on belonging. Broadcasters called it an unprecedented challenge from a younger royal to the idea that rank automatically guaranteed acceptance inside the family. The palace responded carefully. Its official statement explained that private invitations were not constitutional matters questions affecting the legal powers or duties of the crown, and insisted that Charles remained committed to harmony. Yet it contained no demand for Louise to retract her words. That omission spoke louder than anything the palace included. Louise saw the front page at breakfast and immediately turned the newspaper over. She had drawn a private boundary, not asked to become the face of a national rebellion. Sophie noticed the movement and reminded her daughter that public noise did not change the reason she had spoken. The reassurance helped, but it could not remove the fear that every expression, silence, and family appearance would now be examined for hidden meaning. Camilla watched footage of the crowd near Windsor and understood the cruelty of the symbol. A closed door had revived every old question about whether she had ever been accepted emotionally, even after becoming queen. Near the Long Walk, two women stood only feet apart, holding opposing signs. One read, "Respect the Queen." The other declared, "Family trust must be earned." Their disagreement captured the entire crisis: status against intimacy, duty against memory. Confusion soon sharpened the pressure. Some commentators claimed Louise wanted Camilla removed from all royal occasions. Edward stepped forward publicly and corrected the story. The boundary, he said, concerned only specific private gatherings hosted by his family. His clarification mattered because it prevented a painful household dispute from being rewritten as an attack on the monarchy itself. William and Anne then changed the mood without making a speech. At a previously scheduled engagement, they greeted Edward and Louise with unmistakable warmth. The prince did not distance himself, and the Princess Royal offered no sign of discipline or disapproval. Their presence revealed that Louise had not been isolated. She had protection. With the public storm beginning to settle, one final family meeting was arranged. Camilla would attend, but this time no title could decide the outcome before the conversation began. The nation had chosen its arguments, but the final verdict belonged not to the headlines, it belonged to the family members preparing to sit together, without titles between them. In the end, the crisis was not resolved by rank, public pressure, or palace discipline. It was resolved by a family finally admitting that titles could not manufacture trust. Louise's statement forced Charles to accept a painful boundary, Camilla to confront the cost of years of tension, and the younger royals to define loyalty on their own terms. The monarchy survived, but it emerged changed, less protected by silence, and more accountable to the emotions inside its own walls. Charles opened the final Windsor meeting by dismissing every aide and asking those present to speak as relatives, not representatives of the crown. Camilla faced Louise, Sophie, Edward, and Anne without the protection of ceremony. Royal hierarchy, the formal order of authority within the monarchy, would not decide the outcome. Everyone accepted one principle: official duty and private belonging were separate. The Queen would retain full respect at public functions, while family hosts would control invitations inside their homes. Camilla broke the silence through a documented private account later shared with senior relatives. She admitted that ordering the memorial chair removed had been insensitive. Fear had shaped her response. She had mistaken remembrance for rivalry, and believed that private loyalty to the late Queen might weaken Charles. Now she understood that her attempt to protect the king had wounded the very family whose acceptance she wanted. Louise softened, but she did not surrender. She said her statement had been severe because gentler warnings had repeatedly failed. She regretted the public humiliation Camilla had suffered, yet refused to apologize for drawing the boundary. Sophie supported her daughter's honesty, while Edward made clear that future peace could not depend upon Louise pretending the damage had never happened. Camilla returned the memorial card and told Louise the empty chair should have remained. The young royal accepted it, but offered no immediate invitation. Anne understood the meaning of that restraint. Forgiveness could begin in words, but trust would be rebuilt only through conduct. Charles then accepted the consequence. He confirmed that he would attend some private gatherings alone, and would not treat his wife's absence as disloyalty. Camilla would remain excluded from the next two occasions. Afterward, Edward and Sophie could reconsider only when Louise and the other hosts believed the atmosphere felt safe and sincere. The declaration had not destroyed the family. It ended the habit of disguising pain as unity. Camilla lost automatic access, but gained a genuine path back. Charles learned that love could not erase consequences, and Louise proved that even the quietest royal voice could make the crown respect a human boundary. The door was not locked forever, but from that moment onward, it would open through trust, never through title, pressure, or command. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.